college administrators and the pro-Palestinian is how they're typically described, protests that are happening at universities all across the United States. This is, I thought it was interesting last night. I'm forgetting which program it was on, but it was on one of the MSNBC shows. One of the professors from Columbia University was on, and as I recall, it was Columbia. There was one student 3 weeks ago, that's before the protests began, from that university, who had done a TikTok in which he said that Zionists don't deserve to live. And that's the one video, that's Elise Stefanik brought that up and asked the president of the university about it. And the president of the university said, well, yes, he's been talked to and he's been disciplined and he's apologized and it won't happen again. So that's the one incident in the entire university so far. And this professor was saying, there's nobody calling, they are not making anti-Semitic comments. They're saying that people are being killed in our name with our tax dollars and our weapons, and we're not comfortable with that. I thought it was interesting this morning. I was listening to Morning Joe, and Joe Scarborough goes off on this rant. He's quoting Bill Maher from his program on Friday night. And apparently Friday night, I haven't seen the show, but apparently Bill Maher did this little riff, kind of wagging his finger at the student protesters, saying, there's Myanmar is having a genocide, and China has 1 million people in prison, in their prison camps, the Uyghurs, and he goes through a list of horrible things. Syria just killed 1 million of their people. Horrible things happening all around the world. He says, why aren't you protesting them? And as he's going through the list, I'm going, because the U.S. isn't supplying the bombs. Because the U.S. isn't paying for the bombs in Syria. We're not paying for the bombs in China. We're not paying for the military in Myanmar. Literally every single one of the things that he went through is something that we're not paying for. We are paying for the death and destruction that's happening in Gaza. And it's so facile. It's so glib. It's so cheap to say, well, you're protesting the death of 32,000, largely innocent civilians in Gaza. Why aren't you protesting the death of people among the Uyghurs? Well, because we paid for that death in Gaza. And I was just astonished that Joe, Mika, the whole bunch of them, Joe Scarborough and his crew were all basically echoing Bill Maher, echoing Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu's saying the same thing. Okay, students, why aren't you protesting these? Well, because we're not paying for those. Anyway, throughout the 60s and 70s, conservative activists led this counterattack against those of us who back in the 60s, by the 70s, I was married and running a business, but certainly in the 60s in the anti-war movement, we had conservatives saying that we were communists. We weren't. We were opposed to the war in Vietnam. And actually, SDS didn't even start out as an anti-war organization. The Port Huron Statement was written, when the Vietnam War was just a little tiny. We were just providing advisors at that time. And the Port Huron Statement was about racial harmony and economic justice, and basically ending apartheid in the United States. And then SDS, moved into the anti-war territory. But the college presidents went along with the right-wing meme. The right-wing meme was that we were trying to destroy education, that we were disrupting campuses, that, quack, quack, quack. And yes, sometimes we were, but usually in response to police violence. There was a big arrest at Michigan State University. 13 people got arrested, and students went out and overturned a couple of buses full of cops and occupied the campus for a week or two. I get that. I was one of those 13 people who got arrested. It was a big deal. They went after SDS, and it was like everybody was, and then as the campus was being occupied, the right wingers even doubled down, tripled down on all this stuff. So anyhow, there's this article over at Alternet. It's from The Conversation. And, asking the question, is anti-Semitism the new communism? Because the vast majority, 99-point-something% of the people who are protesting at universities around the country are not spouting anti-Semitic talk. And in fact, the one incident that everybody has been talking about, this kill the Jews, it turns out in fact, there's video of this now that was provided by an organizer for Huskies for a Free Palestine. This was at Northeastern University. There's around 100 peaceful protesters, and one of the protest leaders said, "Here it is." Said, "You repeat to me what I say to you. Got it?" In other words, let's do a chant. And when she got up and said, "Let's do a chant," there was a person holding an Israeli flag, a counter-protester, a pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian protester, who shouted, "Kill the Jews. Anybody on board? Anybody on board?" In other words, he's asking the crowd if anybody wants to join him in chanting, "Kill the Jews." He's one of the pro-Israeli protesters. And instead, they booed him off the stage, basically, or booed him. They said, "No, we're not going to do that." But that chant was what was cited by the president of the university to call the police in to start beating on the heads of the protesters, who were not saying "kill the Jews," who had booed down the pro-Israel guy who said "kill the Jews." I mean, this is like right out of the 60s. We saw the leadership of SDS at MSU and in campuses all across the United States being targeted for arrests, very often phony baloney arrests on charges having to do with things that drug charges or traffic charges or whatever. And then of course you had the massacre at Kent State in 1970. I mean, this really hurt the Democratic Party because we had a Democratic president. Well, not in 1970, but in the 60s, we had Lyndon Johnson, and that's why Hubert Humphrey didn't get elected in '68, because Richard Nixon succeeded in blowing up the Vietnam peace talks, and the protests continued. They were very polarizing. So the right is just running an old script here, and that old script is fundamentally dishonest. But that's what's going on, and I think it's very unfortunate. Why Democratic voters won't accept Republican defectors. Stick around. I got to share an amazing op-ed with you. We'll be right back.